Sedans are on the brink of extinction because these days SUVs are selling like hotcakes. But in this video, I hope to show you why sedans are still worth your consideration. And there's no better way to do that than with this. So on paper, sedans may not seem that appealing. This particular variant costs almost 1.5 million pesos. And at a glance, you may think you're better off spending that kind of money on an SUV or crossover. So let's take a closer look at this to see what you'd get if you were to spend that money on the new Mazda 3. Let's start with the exterior. This is what you get when a car is designed by artists and built by craftsmen, as opposed to something that's designed by a bunch of suits using computer software. You'll see that the exterior sports a clean design. Along the side, there are no character lines, just subtle curves that only become apparent because of the reflections. To further keep things clean, you won't see anything as vulgar as a keyhole, fog lamps, or windshield washers. In fact, Mazda went to great lengths to keep this exterior looking clean. The Mazda 3 has an adaptive LED front lighting system, which negates the need for fog lamps. The windshield washers are integrated into the wiper blades, which not only give the car a cleaner look, but also has benefits from a functional standpoint by ensuring the water is sprayed where it's needed. The door handles also have sensors, which means you don't even have to touch your key or do something as primitive as pressing a button just to get in. But you'll find that the keyholes are tucked under the door handles, just in case you need to open the car manually. The Mazda 3 rolls on these beautifully designed 18-inch rims that are elegant but not old-fashioned, or you can say they're sporty without screaming boy racer. At the back you get full LED taillights and dual exhausts. Also worth mentioning is the fact that the color temperature for all the lights in the Mazda 3 are the same, and that includes the interior lighting, lighting for the switches, instrument cluster, reverse and plate lights. Now if you ask me, that's pretty good attention to detail. Now looks are subjective, so I'll leave it to you to decide if you like it or if you love it. But I will say this, Mazda 3 has the 2020 award for World Car Design. So I'll leave it at that. Personally, I know a car has a certain appeal when I find myself looking back at it several times after parking it. Like anything that's made with passion, this interior feels special. Put together by Mazda's Takumi artisans, who spend years honing their craft, the design, layout, and choice of materials here are simply exquisite. The fact that people can have access to an interior like this, especially at this price point, truly is a blessing. Now, as you can see, it's starting to rain outside, so let's get this part of the review out of the way. Starting with the choice of materials. Almost everything here is soft touch, from the dashboard, the armrests, the door panels, and even the sides of the center console are padded so your knees can rest comfortably against them. The buttons and switches are all ergonomic and intuitive. There's a satisfying click when you press the buttons and turn the knobs. You also get aluminum touches on some of the switchgear and around the vents to break the monotony. The layout of the cockpit is driver-centric, but that doesn't mean the other occupants will be left wanting. It's just so apparent how Mazda designed this interior with the driver in mind, by eliminating all possible distractions. For instance, you get this head-up display that shows vital driving information so you don't have to take your eyes off the road. The instrument cluster is a mix of analog gauges with an LCD in the middle. At first glance, you would actually think that the speedometer is also analog since it perfectly matches all the other gauges. I like how Mazda kept the instrument cluster simple because that makes it more legible. Then we get to the infotainment system, which is well integrated and placed directly in the driver's line of sight. Now, this isn't a touchscreen, But Mazda intentionally did that so it doesn't serve as another distraction. And besides, you'd rather have it within your line of sight than something that's easier to reach but isn't within your line of sight, so that you can pay more attention to the task at hand, which is driving. The infotainment system comes standard with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. It also houses a built-in navigation system and the 360 camera, which gives you a clear and crisp view of your surroundings. You can also configure various vehicle settings through this screen. Now, some will say that the instrument cluster plus the infotainment system lacks flair because it's not as colorful as some other systems. But really, if you're into rainbows or that sort of thing, go look at a painting, because at least this displays all the information clearly. Now, we can't discuss this infotainment system without talking about the audio system. The Mazda 3 comes with a 12-speaker Bose audio system. Now, this setup was designed together with the car, which means that the placement of the speakers were considered while this car was still on the drawing board. So you'll no longer find your low-frequency drivers on the doors to eliminate unwanted rattling and vibrations when you turn up the volume. The low-range drivers are now placed on the side of the footwells, which means there are less sound reflections, and that translates to better sound quality. Mid and high-range frequencies are well-defined and there is no treble peaking. There's also just enough low-range pitch, no overwhelming bass, which is actually quite pleasing. The soundstage is also scattered and imaging is well defined. Together with a really well insulated cabin, this audio system can put the smile on the face of any audiophile. Oh, and even the floor mats were designed to help with the acoustics. Now let's talk about seat comfort. And the Mazda 3 was actually designed using a human-centric philosophy, which means that Mazda took a physiological approach to design the interior, and that really translates to how comfortable it is. And I tried to do some reading on how they achieved that, and my head started to spin. But from what I gathered, this car was crafted for its occupants to maintain a natural posture when sitting in it, the same posture one would have when walking. What this does is it eliminates motion sickness, and the same way we never get motion sickness when we walk or run. Simply said, these seats are designed to keep your head stable despite how jarring the motions may be. Other niceties here include dual zone climate control, a frameless auto-dimming rear-view mirror, one-touch power windows for all doors, driver attention alert, front cross traffic alert, pedal misuse alert, and seatbelt warning lamps. There's also a 10-way power adjustable driver's seat with memory settings so you can save your favorite sitting position in case you let someone else drive. Oh, and that also includes the adjustment settings of your side mirrors. Aside from that, each time you put this thing into reverse, the side mirrors will tilt so that you can see the curb when you're backing up. Pretty neat, huh? Now at the back, you'll find that Mazda didn't scrimp on any of the luxuries. You still get the same soft touch materials on the door panels. Now this may not be the roomiest car in its class, but there still is adequate head and legroom. More importantly, the seats are extremely comfortable. In terms of amenities, you get bottle holders on both doors, rear air vents, and an armrest with 2 cup holders. Time to check out the trunk. The Mazda 3 sedan's trunk can swallow up to 374 liters of cargo. Okay, so trunk space may not be class leading, but ask yourself, how often do you fill the trunk to its full capacity? Besides, this is the most premium looking trunk in its class. Try finding another sedan at this price point with hinges that look this good. Now under the hood is Mazda's trusty 2-liter Skyactiv G engine. And this pumps out 152 horsepower and 200 Newton meters of torque. And numbers will never really give this car justice. So it's best that we take it out on the road to see what Jinba-Ittai feels like. Jinba-Ittai means horse and rider as one. And they've carried that over into the new Mazda 3. And they say that when the car and driver is in perfect harmony, driving is fun. And I say, that makes the world a better place. So let's see how this thing accelerates. Okay, so 152 horsepower. That really doesn't sound like a lot. But what matters is how that power is delivered. And in the case of this Mazda 3, peak power comes in at 6,000 RPM. So what that translates to is that as you accelerate, as you get faster, as you rev it out, it feels faster and faster. And that's how you like it, because that really adds to the spirited driving. Now, if you're thinking, okay, then it's probably a slouch off the line. That isn't the case either, because peak torque comes in at 4,000 RPM. So the car is always ultra responsive. Now let's talk transmission. And some people might think that the Mazda 3's transmission is inferior just because it only has 6 gears. But one thing to note is that Mazda designed this transmission so that it has the benefits of a CVT and a DCT without any of the drawbacks. So what does that mean? It means you can expect the smoothness of a CVT without the droning effect, and you can also expect the quick gear changes you get from a DCT without the jerking at low speeds. Now, another thing I really like is how this transmission is tuned. You see, when you have it on manual mode, it doesn't auto upshift, and it actually also rev matches. Now I'm going to switch to manual mode to show you exactly what I mean. This thing is such a joy to drive. Now there are a number of ways that you can select gears with the Mazda 3. One, you could use these paddle shifters. Or you could do it the more conventional way through the gear lever. But what I really like about this gear lever is that when you have it on manual mode, you move it down to upshift, and then you move it up to downshift, which makes perfect sense. Because when you're accelerating and you're being pushed against your seat, you really want to move it down to shift up. That's really how all transmissions should be. But there are actually only a few manufacturers who do it that way. But if you don't want to mess with any of that, you could just leave it on drive, and the car actually does a really good job in adjusting to your throttle inputs. Also, you can put this thing on sport mode if you want some of that spirited driving, and it actually holds your revs a bit longer. But if that's not enough, there's also a kickdown pedal. So there's like a switch behind the gas pedal, and when you floor it and you want the car to downshift, just floor it even more and you'll feel that switch underneath the gas pedal, and it'll automatically downshift for you. And that comes in really handy when you just need a bit more power when overtaking. Now, another thing I want to discuss would be ergonomics, and that becomes particularly apparent when you're behind the wheel. It's just that everything is so intuitive and simple to use. Now, even after just a few minutes driving this thing, I could already operate the climate control and the infotainment system without looking. It's that easy to use. Plus, everything is within the driver's line of sight. The infotainment system is perfectly within my line of sight, that I don't have to look too far to operate it while driving. And the same thing goes with the information you get from the instrument cluster. Plus the fact that there's the head-up display, you hardly have to take your eyes off the road. And it's just so easy to drive and so convenient to drive. Okay, so now let's talk about comfort. And there are a number of things that would impact comfort. So let's start off with the suspension and the ride quality. Now, this comes with a torsion beam suspension. And a lot of people will be skeptical, saying that, okay, the previous generation Mazda had a multi-link suspension, and the current Mazda has a torsion beam. Isn't that a downgrade? Well, once you get behind the wheel of this thing, or even if you ride in the back seat, you'll find that it definitely isn't. But those who are thinking, okay, they're probably cost-cutting with that torsion beam suspension, they actually aren't, because they over-engineered the torsion beam to make it as refined as possible. And one of the advantages of having a torsion beam setup is that there are fewer moving parts. So it's like having a really good bike over a more complicated e-bike. And the result is, it's just astounding. You actually have to be here to believe me. But there aren't any problems in terms of ride quality. And when it comes to handling, together with the G vectoring system, this car is really planted. And it handles really, really well. Now, since we're talking about ride comfort, or comfort in general, I also want to comment on this car's NVH. The NVH is just superbly done. And that's in terms of road noise, in terms of engine noise, and how well it isolates you from basically anything you'd be able to hear from the outside that would serve as a distraction or as a nuisance. It does a really good job in isolating you from all that. So here, I'm gonna accelerate, and you'll see that even if I rev it out, the engine noise won't be annoying. And then the third thing that adds to the comfort levels here would be, of course, the ambience and these ultra comfortable seats. And we already talked about that in the interior segment. So all put together, this makes for a really sensational driving experience. Okay, now let's talk a little bit more about handling. Now, the Mazda 3 has always been regarded as a very good handling automobile, even the first generation model. And I would know because I owned one. As a matter of fact, as far as I'm concerned, that would be the benchmark in terms of how a compact car should handle. It's just so precise, and it always feels planted on the road. And, it gives you so much confidence behind the wheel. So how does this compare? Well, this has G vectoring. And what G vectoring does is it adjusts throttle and brake inputs to certain wheels so that it helps you turn. And what that leads to is the ability to corner with more confidence and more precision. You actually feel like you're in control of the vehicle regardless of how fast you're turning in. Now, ultimately, it just makes you feel like you're a better driver. And I like that. Okay, now I want to talk about this car's steering. And before I dive into that, I want to say that a lot of manufacturers, they tune the car to give false impressions, to give false positive impressions. For example, they can make the throttle ultra sensitive to make you feel that the car is a bit more powerful. Or in many cases, especially these days, they make the steering ratio really quick to make it feel as if the car is ultra responsive when it comes to steering and that it handles well. And that isn't always the case. For lack of a better word, it's almost trickery to a certain degree. But in this case, Mazda has done the complete opposite. So Mazda 3s have always had pretty good steering inputs as far as the ratio is concerned. But in this case, they kind of dialed it down a bit. And they did that so it feels more natural. So while other cars are tweaking their steerings to make it feel quick and responsive, Mazda has done the opposite. And it's actually worked pretty well. Because together with the G vectoring system, if this steering was any more sensitive, you'd find the car being so fidgety. And as a result of that, you'll need to make more corrections when going around a curve as opposed to what they've done with the car. And it just feels so natural. And together with a G vectoring system, you can take those corners without making so many steering corrections. So now let's talk about the brakes. And I'm going to go back to the point that I made earlier with car manufacturers tuning their braking, their steering, or their throttle inputs to make it feel as if the car is better than it actually is. And they do that with brakes as well, wherein they make the pedal travel so shallow, and then the moment you hit the pedal, it applies the brakes in full force. And that gets you to think that, wow, this car's stopping power is so intense, when that has nothing to do with the distance in which the car will be able to stop. It really just boils down to how it feels. And again, Mazda has done it a little differently. So the brake pedal, the brake pedal travel is still shallow, but it's progressive. So, you need, the harder you step on the brakes, the harder it'll apply the brakes. And that's the way it should be, because between you and the car, the guy behind the wheel should still be the boss, not the car. So the NVH of this thing is so good. But what I like about it the most is the fact that it knows where to draw the line. Because it doesn't totally isolate everything around you in the sense that you feel like you're on another planet. It does it without robbing you of the visceral driving experience. So to those that think that Jinba-Ittai is just a bunch of marketing mumbo jumbo, you're absolutely wrong. Because this thing really does feel like an extension of yourself. And it is so fun to drive. I could do this all day long. So to sum it up, the driving experience is so refined. There's nothing you can do in this car that'll make your passengers think you're not a smooth driver. You can accelerate like a bat out of hell. You can brake really hard, and the car will always maintain its composure. But that's not to say that the zoom DNA has died. It's still very much alive. I'm sure that this is one of the best driving sedans for under 2 million pesos. Hell, maybe even under 3. But then there's the Mazda 6. The premium variant costs 1,495,000 pesos. You'll have to pay 15k more for the premium sportback and 100k more for the speed variant. So there's no denying that 1.5 million pesos is a lot of money. It's a lot of money to spend on a sedan. It's a lot of money, period. And a lot of people are still going to say, well, just go for the SUV or the crossover. It's a bigger car. You get a bigger bang for your buck. But that's not entirely true. Because on features and the driving experience alone, this knocks it out of the park. And you really can't put a price on the finer things in life. And that's what the Mazda 3 offers. Now, I usually don't do my outros behind the wheel while I'm driving. But I'm making an exception today because I just can't stop doing it. So until next time, guys, thanks for watching Barry. Please don't forget to subscribe if you felt the content was worth watching. I'll see you guys around. In the meantime, I'm gonna have a bit more fun with this thing.